Hey, what's happening? Good morning, everybody. Welcome back and welcome for the first time to the Drummers Education Connection. My name is Jeremy Steinkohler. I'm here with my good friend, amazing drummer and educator, and amazing juggler and showman, Chip Ritter. What's up, Chip?
Hello. How's it
Um,
going, everybody?
how's it going, everybody? Unfortunately, we are without two of our dear friends today. Rick's in Florida visiting his mom, and Bart had some stuff to deal with at home. We wish them the best. We miss them, of course, and hope they're doing all right. We may, if we're lucky, be joined in a little while by our good friend Jim Royal from Connecticut. So we're crossing our fingers that he's going to jump on with us. But in any case, we're here to talk about drums and drumming. And today's topic is about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm not talking about the movie. I'm talking about gigs. We're going to talk about what makes gigs good, what makes them bad, and what makes them ugly, and share some of our stories. And we'd love to hear from you guys out there about some of your stories, and maybe you have some questions for us about how to handle, things like that, or what makes a gig good. So, but before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things. If you've been tuning into the Drummers Education Connection for the last, we'll be around this is our 123rd episode.
123rd.
If you're a supporter of what we do, we'd love to have your support on Patreon. Chip's going to put the link in the chat there.
It's up.
And the support that you might give, $5, is totally massively appreciated. The amount is not important; it's just the gesture, and it helps us, afford to do what we do and pay for our expenses. And if you become a Patreon member, we have giveaways or gifts that we give you in as a token of our gratitude. So we have our books and our DVDs and some other stuff. I think there's some lessons you can get with us.
There's all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah, so please check that out. There's a link in the chat. Take a look and see if that's something you might like to do. We'd appreciate it greatly, of course. And then we also talk about good things. We talk about things that are good that are happening with us in our lives and with our drumming. And we'd love to hear about your good stuff as well. But Chip, you got any good stuff going on right now?
Man, I got a wedding gig on the 27th. I'm preparing for. It's a good thing for me, and looking forward to playing with some really head cutter musicians. He's hired some of the best players in Arizona, like Mike Levy on bass and Neiman Lyles on saxophone. And I'm just really excited about the challenge. It's going to be good.
Oh, that's great. That's great. You know, I've had people, sort of look down on wedding gigs, but I actually I think they're a lot of fun. You get an audience that's predisposed to love what you're doing and to dance. They just want to have a good time and celebrate, and you can be part of the special day. So, they usually pay pretty well. You eat pretty well. And, it's a fun gig.
Yeah, and the gig's over before everybody gets too drunk.
Exactly. Right. Cool. Well, for me, I've got a gig coming up on Friday with Erica Oba and Chris Bastian at Mr. Tipples in San Francisco, which is this really great jazz club with the candles on the table. It's kind of an old school place, but with a modern vibe. Very much looking forward to that. It's one of my favorite groups to play with. Piano jazz trio. And then I got a couple gigs coming up at the end of the month with the Bonafides, which is this New Orleans R&B funk band that I play in. That's always a good time. Always a good time. Bonafides, yeah. So let's see. We're going to talk today about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we'd love to hear from you guys about your good, bad, and ugly stories. But before we get sharing our stories about the best gig we ever had, the worst gig we ever had, Chip, this is a question I always ask my students when they come in after seeing a show and they say, "Oh my God, it was so awesome. It was so incredible. I loved it. It was such a great show." My first question is, what made it such a good show to you? What was it about the show that made you have such a good time as an audience member? What do you suppose I'll tell you what they typically say, but what do you have as to what they say?
The drummer was on fire.
That's a good one. Sometimes that is the case, but that's not usually the first answer.
Oh, okay.
That's a good one. They usually say, like the band, they talk about like the how into it the band was. The band was so into it, the band was super present. They were super animated, they just were rocking, they brought it, right?
Firing on all cylinders. Yeah,
exactly. So the intent, the energy was there, the engagement with the audience. And that's just a good reminder to me that when I'm playing, like that's what it's all about. I used to trip on mistakes really hard when I made them. Of course, I don't make mistakes anymore, never. and it would, put me in the bad headspace of thinking about what I was doing wrong. And instead of remembering that those things go by in an instant, and most 99% of the people don't even notice them. And if I start tripping on that and going down that spiral, it just doesn't make me play better, right? And it takes me out of connecting with them because I'm thinking about me. So usually now when I make a mistake, I laugh it off and I'm right back to it. And it's all about bringing it, right? I want to have that connection with the audience that all my students talk about when they see these great shows.
Yeah.
So what are some of the gigs you've had, Chip, that have been, or maybe you can answer this question too. What for you when you play, what makes a gig a good gig?
What makes a good gig? What makes a gig a good gig would be that everybody knows the music. It's familiar. We're all on time and we're all in the same headspace and we're all just going for the brass ring, really going for it when we play. It also helps to have a good connection with the rhythm section, with the bass player, where I don't have to worry about cues or anything, where we both know each other and the parts so well that we kind of flow together. And having a good flow, I guess, would say that makes a good gig for me. Plus food. It's always good to have some food.
It's nice to have some food. I feel like the food is a sign of respect.
Yeah, right.
If everybody's being fed on the gig,
that's pretty good.
Yeah, right. And I've had gigs where like the at a private party or a country club thing where like the guests are being served steak and shrimp or whatever, lobster, and then the band goes downstairs and eats tuna fish sandwiches.
Yeah, right.
In the basement. Hey, Jim Royal, there he is. What's happening, brother?
Jim Royal.
What's up?
Oh man, great to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
We're just talking about the topic of today's discussion is the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we can talk all about the movie and the screenwriting and the acting. No, I'm just kidding. It's about gigs, being good, bad, and ugly. We were just getting into what makes a gig a good gig for us when we're playing. What makes it feel like a good gig? And Chip was just going on about for him, it's about connecting the musicians being prepared, and especially a connection with the rhythm section and a flow with the bass player, and getting fed.
Yeah, getting food.
Good food, right? It makes a difference.
That's a good gig. Doesn't get better than that.
So I'll kick it to you, Jim. What for you? What makes a gig a good gig? For like you walk away and you're like, oh man, that was an awesome gig. So happy to be doing that.
I think like for a lot of us, you play with certain people that are in your core of performing, and we just did it like a week ago. It was our jazz quartet that played, and I've been out of the mix a little bit recently because I was away and this and that, whatever. So it was like an old glove, like our synergy and connection, where you just know what someone's going to maybe do, and everything just clicks, and there's just magic right from the get-go. Everybody walks away at the end of the night. You all felt the same way. Everything just goes on autopilot, and not that you're not taking chances, but it wasn't a jazz gig on to that level of
right.
You're not blowing Coltrane tunes,
right.
But it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You could be playing standards,
right?
But you're connecting like in that Ahmad Jamal kind of thing, and you're creating little arrangements right on the spot because you trust everybody. That is the most awesome gig I think anyone could have, because again, we're also freelancers, so we could be thrown into the mix with a bunch of people that we don't play with all the time. But that would be an ideal gig for me. And it was a great event. It was a fundraiser for an organization that I work for, and people were listening, and there were colleagues of mine that were there, where there were all musicians from the youth orchestra. So it's a nice feeling of they're really appreciating it too.
Yeah.
Sometimes you could be at what we call maybe a jazz gig, where a lot of people are talking, half listening, but you're still going to give it 110 and do what you have to do anyway. So that sort of gets into the, it's still okay, but the ultimate is when all those things hit together.
Right. Yeah, I like when people clap after solos.
Yeah. Oh, you know right away that there's a great connection there.
Yeah.
and it just makes you feel wonderful. So I completely agree with you on that.
Let me ask you guys a question. Can you have a really good gig where you feel like the band is on fire, but the audience is just not engaged with you?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've had all that range of experiences where we've played for the bartender, where we've played for massive crowds that were completely into it and fully attentive, and other times where you shred this thing and then there's crickets, right? Because you're there for it's environment, and it's you're playing a jazz gig and it's a busy brew house and people are hanging out drinking beer, yucking it up, and you're just there to sort of for the environment. But I agree with everything you guys said. I find that the people I play with makes a huge difference in terms of how good the gig goes. There are some bands I play in some configurations where it's always a good gig, right? Because there's so much love between the musicians, so much mutual respect, and so much professionalism in terms of how they apply their craft, that it's always good. Sometimes it's especially good, like, wow, man, that's, your solos were just on fire tonight, we're super inspired, but it's always good. And then there's other times where, if the vibe isn't totally happening among the musicians, it feels like someone's mailing it in, or, like they're not bringing that presence and that intention, right? Maybe that's a good word to come back to, is intention.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't feel like it's as good, even if the audience is into it, So I think there's multiple ingredients, right? There's the connection with the bandmates. There's your own feeling about how you're feeling that day, and are you feeling healthy? Are you feeling focused? Are you feeling tired? Whatever. And then there's the connection with the audience, and all those things together, combined to make gigs, sort of different grades of how good they are. I'll tell you, recently, one of the best gigs I had, one of the gigs I played recently was one of the best gigs I played in my life. And that was a gig that I played with my son, where he was the featured pianist soloist. He's 17 years old, and he's an amazing, accomplished jazz piano player. And we played a show. It was sold out, and it was sold out to our community, right? There were all these people who knew us, who were there to support. And this was his first sort of coming out gig where he was the featured guy. And it was amazing. He played incredible. I played great. The synergy was there, of course, father and son. And we played a lot of his original tunes, and it was just, I'll remember that gig forever. That was so special.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't think it gets much better than father-son, father-daughter on the bandstand,
right,
when you're at the level where there's real professionalism happening. You're playing, and how could you not be prouder? But you're sort of like you're on the outside listening in, going, well, this is really happening.
Right.
And but when you were saying that, it made me think of my bandmates on that particular performance. I've been off, a certain gig we've been doing once a week or once a month. And I couldn't do like 3 or 4 of them in a row. And they just said to me, it was the opposite. They were talking to me that there was someone that subbed, and from the downbeat, it was a disaster.
Right.
But it's someone that I wouldn't think that would happen with.
Right.
And the whole night from the downbeat is like, okay, what are we gonna do?
Right. Those are painful. So that we're gonna get to the ugly in a minute.
Okay. I didn't know if we were going in and out. So anyway, that just made me think of that.
No, it's great. David Betts has a good question for us. He says, how would you score a gig? I think he means, how would you rate a gig for yourself, where you felt like you played well and got in all your fills and you nailed all your parts, but the band as a whole didn't seem to click? That's a good question.
I don't know. I'd score it low. I'd score it low. I wouldn't be exactly thrilled about that situation.
That's kind of like asking Steph Curry, when he goes for 35 points, but the team loses.
Yeah.
How was the game?
And I think that's a statement that a lot of, let's say sports for a second, they'll say, and I don't know if they're programmed to do that, but it's like, well, if we didn't win the game, then what I did means nothing.
Right.
That's
yeah.
So if all my fills were great and I was, just playing so tasty, but the band just didn't work, that doesn't feel good when I'm driving home.
I agree.
That doesn't feel good.
I agree.
So look, you always want to bring your best. You want to bring 110. So you can walk away knowing, look, I really tried my best, but but for the rest of it, no.
Well, and that is something you can feel good about. You can feel good, like, hey, you know what? I felt really good about how I played tonight. The band wasn't happening. That was beyond my control, or to the extent that it was. So, at least I can feel good about the work that I put in, and, nailing my parts. And, it wasn't my fault, even though I'm part of the band. So yeah, you can hang your hat on that, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it's going to be like a 5.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. No higher than a 5, because, yeah, good for you.
Yeah.
Right. Who cares? Right. Right.
I played a gig once at the Century Room in Club Congress with Heather Hardy, and we did all these jazz songs I was not familiar with, and I just practiced and rehearsed and went over them and over them and over them and did the best I could. And I felt like I was doing horrible. I felt like I was missing everything. But at the end of every set, everybody was like, that was fantastic.
Right.
It's like, I felt like it was a disaster, but it ended up being good for everybody else.
That's a good one, Chet, because, sometimes, and that, I mean, did you feel after everybody said to you, oh, it was amazing, amazing, did that sort of temper your feeling of that it wasn't good?
Yeah, absolutely. It started making me realize that maybe it wasn't that bad.
Right.
Well,
because they're focusing on bigger picture, feel, groove, time.
Yeah, and I showed up. I was with, I had my ears on. I was ready, and I played for the situation where the situation called for. Right. I did the best I could as a drummer, and left it all out there.
I think in that situation, we're going to be our own worst critic.
Yeah,
but it sounded like you did a lot of prep, and it's still, you could go, yeah, that could have been better, that could have been better. But overall,
right,
unless I don't think anybody was scoring you out in the audience. It's just, what was the product that came out, and it came out strong enough and solid enough so that it certainly was acceptable. But to you, you're like, that could have been better, that could have been better.
Yeah.
And you got to roll with it. I think it can happen. It can happen either way. Did you guys still see me?
Yeah, we can see you.
You got dark there.
Yeah. Hopefully it comes back.
Yeah, but I feel what you're saying, Jim. Yeah. There's your awareness of the whole thing, and then there's your awareness of your own part of the whole thing, right?
Yeah. And sometimes it could go either way. You could feel like you did amazing on the gig, and then one of your really good buddies could go, they could be honest with you and say, you were pushing,
right?
You were pushing tonight. Or the word I use a lot to just not make anyone feel bad, I always use the word we.
Right, I do too.
We could have been better on that chart, or in the bridge, or whatever, or just something wasn't quite, because again, no one wants to be signaled out, and look, for the most part, everybody knows.
Right.
But again, it could be, that could be part of the ugly, where it could be someone that just doesn't get it, and that doesn't know, and they think they're all that in a bag of chips, and it really isn't at all. So.
Okay, so we've covered pretty well, I think, what makes a gig a good gig, and if that's
good stuff.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear from you guys who are listening and tuning in today about your experiences with gigs. What makes a gig a good gig? What makes a gig a bad gig? Or we'll get to also the ugly gigs. You can answer that from a listener's perspective, from a band member's perspective, from a musical director's perspective. There's all different ways that things can go well and things can go less well. Let's talk a little bit about what we would refer to, I guess, generically as bad gigs. What makes a gig? And one thing we haven't even talked about so far is that there's that sort of musician's unwritten rule about a gig has to have 3 things going for it to be a good gig, right? They say it's got to either pay well, or it's got to be good for your career, or it's got to be a chance for you to play with some new musicians or something like that, right? And people say, oh, if it's got all 3 of those things, it's a great gig. If it's got 2 of those things, it's a good gig, and 1 of those things, oh, not so much. But we all know you can play gigs with good bands and get paid a lot and not have it be a good gig. And you can have gigs that you'd play for nothing and they can be amazing gigs, right? So it's clearly more than just about those things. But what makes a gig when you're done with the gig, you're packing up, you're driving home, you're thinking, man, that sucked. That was a drag. What's a bad gig for you guys?
Oh man, playing outside with a bad sound system. Playing outside in the cold with the bad sound system, all these audio problems. I had a couple gigs like that, and it was just horrible. And we were just glad to be done with it.
Yeah, well, the sound system, that's a big one, right? Sometimes you can bring everything and everything's dialed in to be good, except the sound is awful.
Yeah.
And it could be, it makes me think of inside. Sometimes the band leader can, for whatever, their choice, they want to put the speakers in front of the band, not behind, because of the feedback possibilities, etc. But unless there's an amp on stage, then you start leaning in and you're guessing because you're not hearing things the way you want to. Because if it's not a grand real piano, if it's electric, a keyboard, so in some gigs aren't appropriate to have in ear. You're not going to do that. So that could be right from the get-go. That could be rough.
That's a bad gig.
This is stuff that even happens recently, and at this point in my career, I'm not shy about being professional and saying, can we adjust a little bit, having a little trouble hearing, because the whole night can be just
absolutely
it's not fun because you're struggling to hear everything. And even if you're pulling back, you shouldn't have to strain that bad. And again, if you need to have your ears checked, that might be a different story. That's even uglier. But generally speaking, if you pull back enough, you should be able to hear what's happening around you. And sometimes the speakers can be too high up and they're not closer to an earshot. So I'll just say, hey, can we lower those a little bit? I want to make sure everybody's still happy. But that's a kicker for me now. And the gigs for me. I want to be able to hear everything well enough so we can connect the way we should. Those kind of things shouldn't be in the way of a great night. So whether, like you said, outside, if it's outside, more or less, I'm going to be using in-ear unless there's a monitor. But
Jim, of course, your point is well taken. However, there are gigs where you just don't have the control you'd like to have. For example, there's 4 bands going on back to back, and there's a 10-minute changeover, and everything's on a tight schedule, and you're trying to get the sound dialed in, and you did a line check, and maybe you had a sound check before, but the sound person forgot. Who knows? And it's sort of like, well, it's already 5 minutes past. We gotta play.
Right.
And we got to roll with what we got, and it's not ideal. Okay, I'm just going to hear that bass just super freaking loud in my right. And it's right next to me, and they need that stage volume, blah blah blah. And okay, I'm going to hear the bass all night, and that's it. And I've had those, those have been usually gigs that I feel like, that was a drag. That's the first thing I say when I'm done is, boy, the sound was really bad, and that made it hard for me to play the way I wanted to play, and hard for me to hear what I wanted to hear. So that's a really important piece. That's part of why once bands reach a certain level, they'll travel with their sound people, right? Because and they pay them just like a member of the band because they're so critical, the job they do.
Right.
What else besides quality of the sound makes it bad?
It made me think of this because you just said the bass. I feel so fortunate that I play with bass players that we can coexist and just let it groove and flow. But it's that night when the bass player is wanting to be more controlling of what the time is. You're not working together, and he's either pulling back or he's pushing too much, and you're kind of fighting with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real tough night. It doesn't happen to me much anymore, but again, at this point, I'm not going to wait on that. You're going to have to say something. Why would you want the whole night to be that vibe? And why can't you just say, can we agree? I might be pushing, you might be pulling back. Can we meet in the middle? But sometimes it could just be a bass player that's what it's going to be. And you got to make that work that night.
Yeah. Some bass players are like that. They're insistent on their time.
Yeah. And
you know, when you're playing in a groove band, there's a certain extent to which, like, okay, things are going to lock into place and everyone's, you know, capable professional player, and maybe energy's there, maybe it's not. But when you're playing a jazz gig, I feel like it's a little different because there's so much more intense listening that needs to happen for it to go well and for you to be, you know, making this music, delivering this improvisation thing together. And when you get solipsistic players who are just, you know, not paying attention, who are just, you know, off in their own world, it's like, hey, we're a trio, we're a quartet here. It's not just a solo show, and you're playing with other people who happen to be in the same, you know, room. So, you know, that whole listening thing. I mean, you know what I'm talking about, Jim. As a jazz player, you hear that all the time. Like, you know the difference when the band's listening to each other and when they're not, or when there's connection between the soloist or the pianist and the drummer, and when there isn't.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that for me is a big one too. When it just feels like I could have been anybody there. I was just a timekeeper because there was no connection with the soloist. That's
well, and I think we could set that up at the beginning of the gig within the first piece that, you know, I am listening. Like if we could set that example, like I want to, like, and again, you don't want to, like when you're younger, well, make sure you're listening to the solos. You don't want to be cat and mouse, but you do want to let them know that you're present and you're listening, and you want to pick up on some things, and that could set the beginning of the night. That, hey, let's all just listen here. Boy, this could really be wonderful.
Yeah, but I've played with people where, like, hey, I've done exactly that, and there's no recognition, there's no back and forth, there's no acknowledgement of, oh yeah, I hear you, I feel you, drummer, and I'm gonna, you know, respond to you, and let's have this conversation. It's more like, I don't care what you're doing, I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. What you're doing has no. I mean, you know, in fairness, it was a 22-year-old, so, you know, maybe that's part of the growing up thing.
Right. And you know, it's funny, that happened to me recently. Let's say in the last 3 months, I played with a pianist who was in college. I guess he was called in last minute to sub. And I know he was trying his best, but he also was trying to survive.
Right.
And wanted to get through the gig, but there wasn't the give and take. He just wanted to make sure he kept the form, played what he needed to play.
Right.
I still was giving, you know, but you know, but then I right away I went, he's just trying to make sure we get through this gig.
Yeah. I was at a gig once. It was called the Jazz Generations Show, and they had billed it. It was a trio, no drummer, Charlie Hayden on bass, Benny Green on the saxophone, and a piano player who I'm not going to name.
No drummer? What kind of crap is that?
Well, you know what? I think as Charlie Hayden got older, his hearing got worse, and I think he stopped playing with drummers at a certain point because his hearing was so easily, you know, damaged, or it was already damaged or something.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what it was. So during, you know, when Charlie would solo, the piano player would just start comping all over the place. And on a couple of occasions, the first 2 times it happened, Charlie held up his hand to the piano player saying, basically, stop. And he kept soloing, and the piano player's like, oh, okay, and backed off. And after the second time, he just didn't play behind the bass solos anymore. And yeah, it was intense. I mean, it was a conflict on stage, right? And I thought, oh, you know, I think Charlie felt like the dude was overplaying, and he wasn't listening. He wasn't being sensitive to the space that Charlie was filling up. And I think that's, you know, it's personal. It's very personal, like how people like to comp behind other solos and whatnot. Some people like more engagement. Some people like more space.
Absolutely. I mean, and at that age, for someone who is a
giant,
a bass player icon in that genre, right. But you'd surprised that there wasn't a rehearsal,
right?
And
right.
None of that came out. That right. You know what, I really want almost nothing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's something you could have said, right?
Right, but you know, that could be us, and you know, your pride. Oh, boohoo, your pride got hurt. But then you got to suck it up and go, okay, I'm not the leader. If you're not the leader,
right?
Even if you are the leader, it still should be for the best of the evening.
Yeah.
So, but again, that's easier said than done, right? I mean, we're all human beings, and you're going to feel a little bit, you know, like you got a little jab, but you got to try to let it roll off and just make it work.
So what are some we've talked about sort of like the general, like what makes a gig good, what makes a gig bad. Do you guys have any specific stories of gigs that you've played where you're like, oh man, that was a bad gig?
Yeah, I remember playing in at JJ's in Texas with Long John Hunter. We're in the middle of the show and we're doing the whole deal and we're grooving and we're having a great night and the crowd's going along with us. And the guitar solo is playing his guitar solo. And all of a sudden, on top of the guitar solo, over the PA, comes a harmonica that's in a wrong key.
Oh.
The bartender has a mic that goes directly to the PA.
Yeah.
And the bartender's playing this out of key harmonica, and everybody's drunk over by the bars cheering him on.
Yeah.
And we're just looking around like, what is going on? And it ruined the entire thing for me. It was just like the whole night was shot because they insisted on having the harp tender do his thing. You know,
Chip, that's hilarious.
it was horrible.
I once played a rehearsal with a guy who also played harmonica in the wrong key, and I went up to him afterwards and I said, "Hey, you know, your harmonica's in a different key than we were playing." He's like, "Oh, they come in different keys?"
Yes, they do. Wow. Oh, okay. I thought of one. It's a vocalist that was invited in a series of special guests as part of a series that we were doing. And I think before the gig, we had just run through a few things. And she made a comment to the bass player that was so inappropriate and not professional that it set a tone right from the beginning that I wasn't leading. But if I was close to saying, you know what? We're going to send you home early. It really, she's like, she was something about his intonation and are you listening? I mean, and again, she's much, much younger to a bass player that I work with all the time. And it was just so, it just wasn't okay. It wasn't her gig. And I don't know. So it's setting the tone. It wasn't like when we started, this was before we even started. And but our bass player is so professional that he just smiled. I don't even know if he replied to that, or you just go, okay, you know. And she just was on a pedestal and singers.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, again, a lot of them are fabulous and wonderful, but then you get some prima donnas and yeah. I played for the team and I was thinking of the leader that day and knowing he probably was doing the same. And so, yeah, those are tough because you want, say it was only an hour concert. You just want it over. Like,
right.
I don't want to work with you right now or ever again.
Yeah. Just get me through this.
And it sets a good example of, she just burned a bridge with you know, 3 other musicians that are so heavily involved in the scene that we'd never call again.
Right.
I would never call her ever.
Right.
I'd rather cancel a gig.
Yeah.
So that's something that we should take home, right? I mean, you're going to burn a bridge. There's some you don't want to burn. And even if you're feeling it, even if you don't have to say it.
Right. You can get through and be professional and walk away thinking I'll never play with that person and that's fine. But it's another thing to create a blow up on the stage or say something off color or whatever.
Yeah, that's just negative and you know, to make yourself feel better. I don't know. It's like
people, you know, a lot of people playing music it makes you vulnerable, right? And a lot of people come to it and they've got their stuff, their baggage and their trip and their insecurities, and they manifest on stage. You know, I've been on many gigs where the band leader is doing the banter in between the songs and saying things that make me uncomfortable.
Political or whatever.
No, not political. That hasn't happened, but Boy, I don't know. And I get banter's not easy. There's an art to it.
Yeah.
And sometimes they just sort of keep going, and it's like, oh man, just stop. Let's just play, because you've lost the audience and you're saying stuff that's like not funny or inappropriate or making me uncomfortable. It's got to be making the audience uncomfortable.
Right.
And those are where I'm just cringing, and I don't want, you can't.
That's no good.
Yeah, that's happened a fair amount.
I think a theme here is that most often anything that makes a gig ugly is the lead singer.
Well, I'll tell you one that was not about a lead singer. This was one of the worst gigs I ever played, and it was just a nothing gig. It was a jazz trio gig at like a Nordstrom's, like a department store in the atrium or whatever. And I had been recommended. I was recommended to this gig from another drummer, and it was the first time he had recommended me. So, want to make a good impression. And it's just a jazz trio with capable players. And, maybe halfway into the first set, he called some tune, and I was choosing to play the head on the hi-hat, kind of like an old school, early jazz.
Papa Joe.
Yeah, right. And afterwards, after that song, he said, no, after the set, he said, you really should listen to some of those early jazz drummers. And I was like, oh, screw you, man. Like, who do you think you're talking to? Like, and you're so condescending, And he said, yeah, because they try to catch hits in the melody and, punctuate the melody, where it makes sense to hit the hits. And you should really listen to some early jazz drummers. I was like, oh, like Sid Catlett, Papa Joe Jones, Max Roach, Kenny Clark, who are we talking about? And it just, from then on, but he liked the way I played bossa novas. So the rest of the gig was all bossa novas.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was like, oh man, I was like shooting daggers at him, with my eyes, because I was so pissed, and because he was so condescending and such a jerk. And it wasn't like he was like any amazing piano player. He was competent, but nothing great. And that was the last time I played with him, obviously, right? And that was unfortunately the last time that I got recommended by that other drummer, because I'm sure, this guy got back to him and said, oh, this guy, didn't play the way I wanted him to play. And it was just a taste thing, It was just a taste thing, and like a decision really based on that one song to play it a certain way that he didn't like. So that stuck with me for a long time. I was thinking, I would thinking, oh, I did something wrong. I wasn't up to the task. I didn't play well, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, nope, that wasn't the case. It took me a while to come around to it, but it was like, that was all him.
Well, yeah, it shows his unprofessionalism. I mean, you're
Right.
coming in off the cuff. You've never worked together before. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm supposed to know exactly what you want.
Right.
Maybe as the gig went on, or maybe if you said something in passing.
Right.
Was there a break at any point on that gig?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he had a moment, or is that where he interjected that stuff?
Exactly.
But it could have gone the other way.
That's right.
But he took it negative, and it's like, well, that's great. Now we got to finish this gig.
Right. Exactly.
So yeah, that's not easy to do. But again, I mean, we're all troopers, and we're gonna do our best to finish it, and then it's our choice. No, maybe I don't want to sub for you when you can't do the next one.
Yeah. Right.
If he's playing piano, I'm busy.
I'm not on the gig. Right.
Yeah. So I get it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the ugly for me. That was the ugly one.
Wow.
But the older you get, I mean, gosh, I'm 52 now, and like when I'm younger, that was a long time ago. It's like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 20, no, long time. Those things tended for me to have like gigs that were bad or ugly tended to have a real visceral impact on me, and they would sit with me for days, sometimes even longer. And I would play it over in my head and obsess about it a little bit maybe. And now that stuff just doesn't faze me, things roll off my back so easily now, because I know where I'm at. I know who I am as a player. I have tremendous confidence in my ability, and my taste and my choices. And you know what? If that's not right for the vibe with you, that's cool. We're not going to be playing again together because we're not simpatico, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And that's you know, you may not be right for me either. And you know, I don't take it as like a value judgment or an existential judgment about who I am as a drummer, you know, anymore.
Well, when you're younger and you're something like that happens, it can be catastrophic to your confidence. It can be just like go home and reevaluate everything you know. I mean,
Right.
I went on an audition for a Frank Sinatra tribute band, and I went through the sheet music, and they were like, "Okay, next, go," and I was fumbling along, and I did horrible or whatever, and the guy was just like, "All right, that's it. Get the next guy in here," and he walked out of the room, and I was just like so dejected, so beaten just by that behavior. You know what I mean? It was like I had to go reevaluate my playing and talk to other friends of mine and get back on the horse again. You know, after that, auditions are rough in LA. You know what I mean? It can be pretty rough and brutal.
Yeah. I'll tell you guys a story similar to that. In addition to playing drum set, I play the Irish Bowron, which is a frame drum. It's a big frame drum you play with a stick, one-handed stick. And I had picked one up when I was in Ireland the first time in 1991 and learned to play. That's a whole nother long story, a great story. I'll save for another time. But I, years later, was back in Ireland. I brought my drum with me, trying to find some traditional Irish music sessions to sit in and play with. And, you know, the traditional tunes, if you're playing that style of music, there's like a lexicon of standards, you know, just like in jazz, like, you know, these tunes, everybody knows the tunes. It's the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
But of course there's not really a book because they're all learned by ear in this situation. They're easy melodies. And so it's expected, I think, that, you know, if you're playing the Bowron, you know, probably you know most of the tunes if you're a player. I didn't know most of the tunes, but I knew how to play, and I could play pretty well. And of course, all my drumming skills as a trap set player, you know, carried over to my time and my musicality playing this Irish drum. And I go to a pub in Galway, and there's a session going on, really good players, and there's a Bowron player, and he's really, really good. And finally, he takes a break, and I said, "Hey, do you think I brought my drum? Do you think it'd be okay if I sat in and played a couple of tunes?" He said, "Oh yeah, sure." So I start playing, and within 2 bars, he holds up his hand. He says, "Don't play. There's very intricate rhythms in these tunes that, you know, you have to understand to be able to play these." And I'm like, "Dude, you know, again, like, you don't know, you don't know who I am or anything about me. All you're in those two bars." And what he was reacting to was that I was playing too loud, and he was correct about that. I had this heavy stick instead of a light stick, and I just started off with just a heavy hand. And so, you know, I turned red in the face and put my drum away, and that was the end of the night for me. And at the time, I thought, oh, you know, I don't know what I'm doing. Here's this guy told me whatever. The next day I went to this other guy to buy another drum from this drum maker. And I told him about the story from the night before. And he said, "Oh, was that so-and-so? Did he look like this?" And I said, "Yeah, that's him." And he said, "Oh, don't listen to anything that guy says. You know, let me hear you play." He's like, "You play beautifully. There's nothing you're doing wrong. That guy's a jerk. He's super big ego. You know, he's one of the big hotshot guys, and he doesn't want anybody to, you know, encroach on his territory." So another story of, you know, people and the stuff they bring to it. Because, you know, if that's me, if I'm an expert player and someone comes in and sits in, I'm nothing but encouraging. "Hey, great job, man. Yeah, keep working on it. You're doing great." You know, well, maybe I have a piece of advice or whatever, but I'm encouraging. You know, there's just there's no, yeah, that wasn't a gig or anything, but it was a similar story, Chip, about.
Yeah. Well, life is too short, man. You know, life's too short.
Well, when we're younger, though, it's long. And just like you said, you know, when we were 25 or whatever, I mean, you're just establishing everything. So you really take it to heart.
Right.
And it can, I had those experiences too. I'm trying to think of one in particular, but there's no doubt of it could sit with you for days.
Yeah.
You know, until you kind of get distracted into something that makes it go away. But in today now, I mean, hey, I'm 57 now. It's like, come on, You know, I still
Come
want
on.
to. I want to do what I'm supposed to do. I want to feel good about it. Well, as we've said, when you leave, but if it's something that just was kind of let it go. Just let it go,
Yeah,
and
let it
make
go.
the best of it. And it's not worth it.
No, and think about these. These are all these stories that happen to most of us. You know, in the big picture, are very, very low stakes. You know, no one's being threatened. No one's career is being derailed by this thing that's happening on the bandstand at the bar, or at the club. It just doesn't matter. It only matters in as much as you whatever weight or value you assign to it.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing. I think that happens as you get older, is you just realize that the stuff doesn't matter as much as you think it did.
Right. Well, I just thought of one. It was a big band gig for a friend of mine who did a jazz series, and he would have all these great musicians from New York come in, and he was supportive of me enough where he had me on drums, and they're like guys that are in the Vanguard band and doing all this stuff, and I felt out of place, but I always worked hard, as we all do, for preparing. And Bob Mintzer was the guest.
Yeah.
So I made sure, because I had a lot of that in my library already, a lot of his compositions and arrangements, and we didn't know what he was going to bring with him, and we had one rehearsal that afternoon and the concert that evening. So I'm trying to think how old I was, man. Maybe I was 30. I don't know. It was still, anyway. So you just want to play well, right? You want to do your best. So we're playing one of the pieces, and it was a solo section, and the piano player, who I know, nameless, playing in the wrong key,
Mm.
and he turned around, and he took the horn out of his mouth. He turned around and said, "It's in B flat." And it was, that special word that when you hear it and someone saying it with a lot of passion, it startles you. And, obviously I just kept going, and it wasn't me. Obviously, I'm playing time, but, and then it set a weird vibe for a minute, but that player was certainly a senior to me that should have been more aware of what was going on. But I just kept going. And then as we were playing one of the charts, I think it was one maybe that Peter Erskine was playing on, and he turned around and he looked at me, and he just smiled and shook his head. Right?
Oh, that's nice.
So that helped to settle
Yeah.
that moment. I mean,
Yeah.
When you're playing with someone that high profile that plays, with that caliber, you're trying to do your best. And in that moment, it just got, now again, could he have handled that better? Maybe, in that moment. But you could also be really frustrated that you're expecting it to be way up here from everybody.
Right.
So okay, I don't blame him either. Because what, are you going to continue playing in the wrong key for the rest of the solo?
Right.
So, but I don't know. It just, I would take, as our topic today, the good, the bad, and the ugly home with me on every gig.
Mm.
What was great, what was good, and what wasn't so great, so I can learn from it, whether I'm going to be leading a gig or, again, being accompaniment and a side person. And I learned a lot from that, guys. Oh my God, what not to do?
Yeah.
Right.
I would, like you were saying, I would like cringe and go, oh God, that was inappropriate. Why did he say that? Or why did he make that decision or whatever? And I would go, well, I got to learn, don't do that. No matter whether it was musical or verbal or whatever. And that's a big thing for young players. I mean, we're all going to have to learn a lot of it on the bandstand, as we all did. But today, there's so much more out there for everyone to listen to as we're doing this today, and learn so much to sort of catch up a little bit sooner.
Right.
There's not really as many excuses.
Right.
So
my son, as I mentioned, is a really terrific jazz piano player, and he was at the Stanford Jazz Intensive. They have a summer camp for high schoolers where they get to learn from really just some of the top jazz musicians in the world come and teach at this program. Really great. and he was taking a class with Kenny Barron, the great jazz piano player, played with all the biggest names in jazz history. And they were playing a blues or something, and Evan played a blues, and he just completely, bumbled it somehow. And he was mortified, and he said to Kenny afterwards, oh man, that's the worst blues that's ever been played in the history of jazz piano. And Kenny turned to him and he said, no, I think that title belongs to me, which I thought was beautiful.
That is beautiful,
right? Here's like this icon of the jazz piano saying, hey, you know what, I've messed up too.
Oh wow,
it's okay. Like, yeah, I've played the worst blues ever, so you're in good company.
That's a top humanistic pro.
Beautiful,
right?
Beautiful. I loved it. I almost started tearing up when he told me that story, because I was like, oh man, like what a beautiful, compassionate thing to say to a young, impressionable teenager who's like in the glow of your stardom, mega stardom as a jazz piano player, to say, hey, it's okay. We all make mistakes. I've been there too.
Wow.
It's, and then they played some more, and and they got into it, and he ended up playing one of his tunes at our show and at his with his combo, and he sent Kenny Barron the recording of the of the tune, and Kenny said, right on, yeah,
that's beautiful stuff.
That's very cool.
Love it. So there was an example of like sort of a what could have been a really, that was all, I mean, if you think about it, that moment could have gone really south.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That could have been one of those, man, you got a lot of, you better got a lot of work to do, man. I don't know why you're bothering with this. Don't give up your day job. Any of those kinds of things he could have said that would have been totally destructive.
Yeah, you don't have a blues together by now? What the heck? Anything. And yeah, that stays with you.
Yeah, so. and then he turned it the other way, and yeah.
Well, we all have that in that moment, and it's a short moment. On either how you're going to make the statement or how you're going to react to the statement.
Yes.
And it's not easy. And I find I have to work on this too, that you take a second, just pause, and just think about what you're going to say or what your reaction is going to be before you just let it go, because you can't get it back.
Well, and as a teacher, right, our words are very impactful.
Yes.
What we say and how we say it is very impactful to our students. And you can be the mentor and the cheerleader and the supporter and the person who helps them become who they're meant to be and find their voice, or you can be the squashing their dreams, turning them off from music kind of teacher who, doesn't want to let them into the club, who, ruins another person's musical experience in life and sends them off away from it. Your words matter, and what you say matters, and you got to care about how you say and what you say.
Yeah, man, it's backed up by who you are as well. On Facebook, there was a video I posted of me drumming, doing a solo, and my first drum teacher from back in my high school days posted a comment. He said that was some great drumming, and it was just lit me up for weeks.
Right.
Just for weeks.
As an adult. Oh my gosh, I forgot to tell this story. Just this week, Chip, you'd asked me, was anything new going on? I reconnected with my very first drum teacher from when I was 10 years old for the first time in 40 years.
Ooh.
Yeah. So he was it turns out I thought he was a teacher, but he was a student at Juilliard at the time when I took lessons with him. And he was a, classically trained orchestral percussionist and drum set player. And whatever, it wasn't like super impactful or like, oh, he set me on my path, but he turned me on. He was the first guy I studied with, and it was good. And I had a gig out here that I had hired. I was the MD for this weird percussion ensemble piece that was sort of like a new music piece, and I had to hire a bunch of drummers. And I had this one guy who was the principal timpanist at Santa Rosa Symphony. He came down, we connected. He just had lunch, and he mentioned this name, Mark Verigi. I said, "Oh my God, Mark Verigi! That was my first drum teacher when I was 10 years old." He said, "Oh, he's my good friend, and he plays San Jose Symphony, and blah blah blah." And I said, "Oh my God, he's in San Jose. That's right, not too far." So I got it. He sent an email reintroducing us, and I said, "Oh my God, Mark, I can't believe it. I'm sure I was a thoroughly unremarkable student when I was 10 years old, who didn't practice. And I was, you wouldn't even remember me. I was just so generic, but I, here I am, 42 years later, and these are all the things I've done. And I've program, and I played a Monterey Jazz Festival, blah, blah, blah. And I owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude, for helping light the spark for me. So thank you so much." And he wrote back and he said, "Oh, so great to hear from you. I do remember you." And he said, "Well, at the very least, I didn't turn you off from drumming."
That's a good point.
And it was funny. He said, "LOL." It was funny, but I thought, first do no harm, right?
I mean, certain teachers keep you going through a certain time, and it doesn't have to be super spectacular necessarily. But at 10 years old, you don't know. Right. I mean, I'll say that to my students that, I went through things from like 11 through say 13 that I look back at now, like whether it's the swinging solos from Wilcoxon or the Moeller stuff or whatever we did. I'm like, how did I do that then?
At 13, right.
If you listened to your teacher, he told you what you needed to do. I wanted to make sure that I came back. The kiss of death for me was I didn't want him to say, "Well, you're going to need to do that again." Mm-hmm. And I don't think that ever happened.
Yeah.
I was like, I was a practicing and prepared maniac. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And I shared that with my students that, look, that was me. Mm. That's how I felt. I knew from when I started, that's what I wanted to do. And that was it. That doesn't mean that's you.
Right.
I still want you to do something and accomplish something and to have some kind of consistency with your practicing and come back. But I don't know. Are some of those days gone? On that type of preparation.
Right.
That it's a few here and there that are going to come back with that type of commitment. But that teacher was my first teacher. It was someone that my father went to school with, and again, like you did, maybe 30 years later, I know he wasn't in good health, and his daughter reached out, and he was going to be in our area, and he came to the studio now, and it blew his mind as to what I had built.
Right.
And it meant the world to him to see it.
Beautiful.
That's cool.
We sat behind the two drum sets that I have that we shared the same bass drum, and we played together. And then we talked, and then we all went out to have lunch. And it was special. It was really special.
Sure.
So glad that you had that chance too, because that's your beginnings. That's the foundation.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to do as well. That to make sure that their foundation and they're felt really great from their experience here.
Yeah, that's it.
And that I have that. I always say, I got you 110. I got your back. I'm never gonna give up on you. As long as you try, I'm never giving up on you.
Beautiful.
That's good stuff.
Because everyone's going to be what? You're born with a gift. It's got to be worked on. Boy, this is going to be rough, but if you love it enough, we're going to keep going. Whatever it is. That's our job.
Right. That's good advice in any area.
Right? Yeah. You have to give him that. So that you made me think of that. That's awesome.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah, sure.
Well, thanks you guys so much for tuning in with us today. We missed Bart and Rick, of course, but they'll be back next week. And Jim, we so appreciate you coming on today, last minute. We love having you on. You're part of the family, man.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure, and I'm glad. Yeah. Right off the highway. Here we go.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, can you get on? I'll be there in 5 minutes.
that was great. At any time, it would be my pleasure.
We really appreciate it, Jim. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
We'd also like to wish Chris Brady a happy birthday today. He probably
Happy birthday, Chris Brady.
Happy birthday.
Thanks for everything you do for us, Chris, and thanks to Aquarian Drumheads for sponsoring our show. And we'll be back next week. We'll see you guys. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Bye, guys.
Take care.